Welcome to Email After Hours by SenderScore, powered by Validity.
We're your hosts. My name is Guy Hansen.
And I'm Danielle Gallant, and this is Email After Hours. Today, we're diving headfirst into a topic that's annoying, intriguing, and unavoidable these days. That is the world of scam emails. You know, those pesky messages that somehow manage to find their way into our inboxes, promising everything from magical weight loss solutions to exotic vacations. And it feels like these days they're everywhere. We've all encountered them, and let's face it, they are hard to ignore. And lucky listeners, it's a hosts-only episode today, so you are stuck with Guy and I. We're going to explore the weird, wacky, and actually dangerous world of email scams. And we've got some great stories, useful tips, and maybe even a few surprises in store for you. So let's jump in, shall we, Guy?
Hey, so I've got to tell you, I could use one of those weight loss scams. Send it my way.
No comment. No comment.
Let's start by making a distinction, because I think there's only a one-letter difference between spam and scam, you know, especially when we're talking about emails. So, I guess the one's really a subset of the other. But, you know, Danielle, in your mind, what's the difference between a spam email and a scam email?
It's intent, right? Because, the nuance lies in the intent. Spam is just generally unwanted, even if it's legitimate, right? From a legitimate source. But with scams, there's almost always malicious intent.
I think that's right. You know, that they're out to fleece you somehow. You know, they're going to try and make some money out of you. They're going to try and stick some malware on your laptop. They're horrible. But, you know, obviously they're of concern to sort of the consumers that receive them. But, you know, they're scams are important to sort of email specialists and marketers and folks like us as well, right?
They are. And I will tell you, I live in a state of fear of falling for a scam email or a phishing email. There's such a concern because they reduce the trust and confidence in legitimate email communications, meaning declining engagement, reduced performance. And we can talk about the findings from our SMS reports too, where UK and Australian consumers are massively less trusting of their messages because of scams.
You know, I think what strikes me is that, you know, sometimes when it comes to scams, you know, you'd like to think that folk like you and me are reasonably aware, but then you read stories how people, perfectly sensible people, fall for them, and you just think, you know, there, but for the grace of God go I. But let's drill into that, you know, especially with your sort of ex-spammer handset, Danielle. What's the craziest scam email you've ever received?
Well, okay. So I haven't received, actually, maybe I have received one of these. I'll have to cast my mind back. But the one I want to talk about it's called the Nigerian Prince scam. And it is old. Like ever since email existed, it feels like this scam has existed. And so Nigerian Prince scam, also known as the 419 fraud scam, that refers to the Nigerian Criminal Code section dealing with swindling. So a little historical fact for you guys. But this scam sends emails that usually come from a wealthy individual. They share an appealing backstory. So they're looking really with a sense of opportunism in their communications. They appeal to people's kindness, greed, or even their sense of responsibility. But in a nutshell, these scammers tell email recipients that their children have been taken hostage, that there are spiteful relatives that are trying to seize their wealth. There's a whole bunch of backstory that could come with it. But really the key element is that the riches that belong to that person need to be safe kept. And you, lucky email recipient, can help them. And they will share that wealth with you. So they're usually asking to let me deposit this money into your bank account for safekeeping. And it sounds, you know what, you're laughing, Guy. It sounds crazy, but it works. And that is why it is so scary. It is, as like I said, as old as the dawn of email itself. And so tried and true for sure. There's actually a book called 419 where someone's parents were scammed through this measure, and they go on a hunt in real life to find the scammer, which we do not recommend. Do not do that. But it's a good read. How about you, Guy? What about a spam or scam email that you've received or that you have?
Oh man, there's so many. I mean, I've got to tell you, Danielle. I mean, never mind Nigerian princes. I wouldn't trust anything from British princes right now. But that's another story. I think my all-time favorite, just so it was so clever, and you can actually read about this in Freakonomics. So the guy was a stock expert. He knew a lot about the financial markets. And he went and bought himself a list of 10 million email addresses. And his first email send, he split it into two sets, 5 mil and 5 mil. And in the one half, he gave them his stock pick and he said, price is going up this week. And in the other half, exactly the same stock pick, but he said, price is going down this week. And so he sent them out. And of course, for 5 million of his audience, he was spot on. And for the other half, he was wrong. But that didn't matter because next week he discarded the 5 million that he'd gone wrong. And he did it again. He split his remaining 5 mil into 2.5 mil each. Same stock pick. One's going up, one's going down. And he went through this iteration 10 times. So by the time he's got to the end of it, he's down to his last few thousand addresses. But these are the ones that have seen him make 10 picks in a row, and every single one of them was right, and they just think he is, stock picking nirvana. And then he fleeced them. It was very clever.
Genius, right? Like horrible, but genius.
I know.
Email scams aren't new, like I said, right? As long as email has existed, email scams have existed. However, they're becoming more and more sophisticated. There's been a ton of news recently about the impact of AI technology like ChatGPT on email scams, making it much easier for scammers to send more convincing phishing emails. And that's phishing with a PH, everybody. Apart from the fact that AI can correct spelling and grammar in phishing emails, which, Guy, I know is one of your telltale signs of a scam. How else is AI helping spammers out?
Well, I want to pick up on that first, that whole spelling and grammar thing, because you're absolutely right. And I think, a lot of us look at a lot of these, scam emails, and it's like, come on, the spelling's atrocious. The grammar's awful. Who's going to fall for that? But actually, that's been researched too. And it's very, very clever because if you think about it, if you're the scammer, it's not just getting people to open your emails. You're trying to get them to engage in conversations with you. You want to get them on the phone. You want to sell your pitch to them and get them to open their wallet and shell out thousands of dollars. And of course, you've got a limited amount of bandwidth. There's only so many conversations you can have in a day. And, you don't want thousands of people responding to your initial message. The spelling and grammar, it's a weeding device, because what they know is that a lot of people will automatically disregard it. But the ones who still respond to them, even though it's so obviously fake, that's the low-hanging fruit that they want in their conversations. And so that poor spelling and that rubbishy grammar, it's intentional. Make no mistake about that. But anyhow, so rant over. We'll sort of get back to the question.
For now.
What do you think, Danielle? I've got a suspicion that ChatGPT is actually going to make better scammers because it's going to help them write better messages. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we were discussing this episode and just chatting about, the meat, what we wanted to get into, I was talking about this funny thing I saw on the internet where little kids are having ChatGPT write their essays for class. And only in very specific cases where there's an obvious problem does the teacher recognize, oh, okay, we're going to circle this, we're going to send it back, you do your homework. And I think that's going to be the same way for for scams. It's going to be much more intelligent, creeping toward personalized, and I think it's going to be a major threat for our email programs, for WhatsApp internationally, which is a super popular marketing method. What about you?
Oh, I think it's for sure. And I think, the sort of challenge of people using it like that is they're almost going to have to sort of weave in some imperfections, just to sort of make it a little bit more flawed. There was a great story this week here in the UK about Boris Johnson, our ex-Prime Minister. And he was notorious when he was at Oxford for plagiarizing all of his essays. And one of them was like particularly naked plagiarism. And his professor called him in and said, Johnson, this is obviously a copied article. What do you have to say for yourself? And he sort of ruffled his hair and mumbled a bit like he does and apologized that he had been so short a time recently that he didn't have time to sort of insert the necessary mistakes.
A true scammer.
Absolutely, learn from the best. I mean, I'll tell you what, though. I mean, the sort of way that this is already being applied, it's clever and scary in the same breath. I mean, we've got Spamhaus joining us for an episode in a couple of weeks, Danielle, and we're starting to prepare for that conversation. And they were telling me that people that get onto the Spamhaus block list are starting to use ChatGPT to try and create the perfect ticket to persuade them to take them off the block list. I mean, you can't make it up, can you?
You can't. And I'm envious of whoever thought of that.
I wish it was me.
I wish it was me. And we're on a roll now. What are some of the recent troubling uses of technology by scammers?
Well, one which again sort of strikes me as sort of dark genius is there's a new scamming technique called subscription bombing. And this is, sort of scamming gangs who have successfully hacked a business's server and they've extracted all of their customer information, but they want to conceal the fact that the hack has happened because they don't want the breached data owners to be aware that it's happened, because then they're going to go and change all their passwords and, that data is far less valuable. So the first thing they do is they set off their bots to take those email addresses that they've hacked and they sign up for literally hundreds of different programs. So when you come in and check your email for the next time, you're suddenly confronted with literally hundreds of welcome emails and activation emails and sign up emails. And the intent is to make sure you don't see the legitimate email from the business that has just been hacked going, hey, Danielle, we're really sorry your personal data has been compromised. Make sure you change your password ASAP. And, again, you've almost got to grudgingly take your hat off to them for thinking that up, don't you?
You really do. I just was on a vacation and, of course, was catching up on industry news when I got back. And I saw, BIMI, we've talked about BIMI on the podcast before. That is brand indicators for message identification, I think.
Yep. Nice.
Okay.
That's on.
We had Tom Bartel talking about that on one episode with us. Before I left for vacation, they had just introduced this new feature, which was a blue check mark, kind of like Twitter or even maybe on dating sites. These check marks are employed to indicate legitimacy. And by the time I got back from vacation 2 weeks later, this feature had been temporarily rolled back because scammers had already been able to recreate this and to put it in messages. So even legitimacy impersonation is a new risk. And as technology evolves, scammers going to scam.
Just before we move on, I've got to tell you about another one I heard about recently. And again, very clever. So scammers have learned that this is not spam notifications when emails are recovered from the junk folder and put back into the inbox are a very good thing, because as we've known for several years, it sends a very positive, signal to Microsoft or Gmail going, hey, your filtering made a mistake. The recipient really wanted that one. So the scammers also operate literally armies of bots, which are checking their own accounts. And when they're doing their scam sends, picking out all the ones that have ended up in junk and automatically hitting the not spam notification to put them back into the inbox, make them look like much better senders. What do you think of that?
It's wild. And we've said the ingenuity is real, right? Like if these things were being done for good, like quote unquote the good, we would be celebrating these things because they're so unique. And it seems like there's always a new idea. But that's a true manipulation of the mailbox provider ecosystem, right? Which is exactly what we're afraid of.
It is. But, let's try and sort of make this a little bit positive, because I mean, so far we've really been looking at the dark side. If this was Star Wars, this would have been the Empire Strikes Back episode. But how is technology evolving to try and deal with some of these threats?
Yeah, I mean, we're personalizing, right? So this is one way that marketers and really even subscribers can help to validate what's going on in their mailboxes, right? So whenever content is vague, going back to my Nigerian Prince 419 scam, you're so often addressed as sir or madam. So, right? So
do you not like being sir?
I'm officially knighted. So there's some level of personalization, and we've talked about this again in past episodes, where we want to form that one-on-one connection, but we don't want to be creepy. And that balance that we can leverage technology for can really help validate your brand in the eyes of your subscribers.
I think that's right. And I think, just generally speaking, I think, personalization is going to have such an important role to play, because the one advantage, legitimate senders have over the scammers is they often have, those personal data points, which the scammers wouldn't have. And, if you're seen to be using them, that's a sign of security. And I think, what crossed my mind while we were sort of preparing for today's conversation, it's a little bit like those WhatsApp lost phone scams, when you're the parent and you get this random message, from your kids claiming that they're overseas and they've lost their phone and please send them $1,000 to help them survive. And, of course, as a parent, you're worrying about that, but how do you know it's for real? And the simple answer, of course, is to test them a response, sort of send back a message going, I'm so glad to hear from you. Your brother's going crazy with worry, and see what they say, especially if
my brother's name is. And it's not slowing down, right? So AI, machine learning, it's becoming more and more available and accessible, not slowing down. Guy, what do you think that companies like OpenAI should be doing to mitigate their use in the likes of phishing emails?
I think they've got a role to play here, that's for sure. I'm not quite sure what that role is. I mean, there's certainly been, talk in the industry that maybe some kind of digital watermark is required so that, you can identify AI-generated content. But I'm not sure we can, rely on OpenAI and the other sort of generative AI pioneers to, operate that in good faith. And I almost feel that, people are going to have to take matters into their own hands. I like to talk about the idea of Easter eggs, almost sort of leaving little artifacts around the web, which, if they do subsequently appear in an article, you think, okay, I know where that came from. And it's an old story. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Van Halen, the rock band, when they're in their prime. And, when they first started doing stadium concerts, they actually generated some bad press because it became known that they had this sort of 60-page contract with the promoters. And a lot of it was about how to set up the stage and what they wanted in terms of lighting and electrics. But at the end of it, there was what they wanted in their, in their room. And one of the demands was a bit outrageous. It said, we want a bowl of M&Ms on the table, but we don't like brown M&Ms. So you've got to take the brown M&Ms out of the bowl. And, sort of one of the music magazines was interviewing David Lee Roth and going, really, are you sure you guys aren't letting fame go to your head? And Roth actually said, no, there's a serious intent behind this. He said, we actually don't give a stuff about the M&Ms. He said, but, we're doing these huge concerts with 60,000 people in a stadium. He said, safety is paramount, our fans and ourselves. He said, it's a test. He said, and we want to make sure that our entire contract has been read properly so that we know the stadium's been set up safely. He said, if we get to the dressing room and they haven't done that M&M thing, he said, we don't mind about that. He said, but it does immediately set off a red flag in our mind that what else hasn't been read and what else hasn't been actioned, which might really matter. And so when I talk about Easter eggs, I always remember that story, sort of a subtle little test, which tells you something far more important if it doesn't materialize.
Two thoughts. One, I'm thinking about that person who's picking out all the brown M&Ms.
They must have been swearing or eating them.
That's what I would be doing. Also, it reminds me of those like critical thinking or reading tests really in school where it's like, step one, follow all of the instructions in order, which people don't. They just do number 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you get to the end of the test and it's like, don't do any of these things. Hand in the paper after step one. And it's true. They get you. But you raise a good point, right? Like marketers and people in the field of email strategy should be making an effort to combat the scam epidemic. So how do you think we should be doing that?
I think it sort of starts off pretty simply. I've spoken to loads of postmasters and filtering companies over the last couple of years. And, a question I'll often ask them is, what's their default position on email marketing? Do they really have a problem with it? And the response you normally get is actually, as long as it's sort of, permission-based and correctly operated, they don't have a problem with email marketing at all. But the thing is, their primary loyalty is to their customers. If you're a mailbox provider, your primary loyalty is to all of those people who own addresses on your platform. And, they're wanting to protect them. They're wanting to ensure their safety so that they don't get compromised by this tsunami of malicious traffic, which is hitting them every single day. And they're saying, the rules and the tactics and the processes that they've got in place are to prevent that malicious traffic from reaching their customers. And so, their advice is very simple, which is mostly if you're an email marketer and your traffic ends up getting blocked by them or getting caught up by their filters, it's because you've triggered one or more of those rules that they've got in place to stop the genuine malicious activity. And, if you want to look like a good actor, it's very simple. Don't look like a scammer.
Easier said than done, I think, for some of the clients, some of the emails that I've seen. And I think, too, educating our audiences it seems so simple, but it's crucial, right? Because especially if you are in insurance or banking, really any company that's dealing with or processing, holding sensitive information, customer information, you need to make sure that you are telling your subscribers about these potential red flags that would come in emails that are maybe not from them, or providing customer support information.
No, I think that's absolutely right, Danielle. But not just the red flags. I think, if there's such a thing, also the green flags. I mean, you were talking about BIMI a moment ago. And I think, for me, there's probably still like a big role for email marketers to play to educate, their customers that BIMI is a sign of trust, especially when it's got that blue check box next to it. And that, when you see it, that that's a sign that it really has come from us. And, if you ever see an email claiming to come from us and it's not there, don't trust it. We're doing this for you. So, I think that education, plays in both directions.
Absolutely. And earlier, we made the distinction between spam and scams, maybe kind of part and parcel, right? But even legitimate emails can be flagged as, at the very least, spam.
Yeah.
So how can marketers make sure that their emails are not perceived as that worst type of spam, a phishing email or a scam? What are those green flags?
Well, I think there's a few things here, and I think part of the answer probably overlaps with what we were saying previously. And I was looking at my Outlook.com account, and I actually quite like what Microsoft had done there, because you actually have two alternatives. You can report spam, or you can report phishing. And the report phishing option is actually interesting. It's because the way that Microsoft responds to that is, what's the right word? It's tougher. It immediately feeds into their fraud prevention team so that they can start actioning it. They immediately delete it from your inbox. Interestingly, at a corporate level, if they get two or more of those report phishing notifications from employees in the same organization, they will immediately remove it from everybody's inboxes, which is smart. You're thinking that's how technology should be working. But I think from an email marketer point of view, topics like Apple's mail privacy protection, and I think feedback has been quite ambivalent over the nearly 2 years that it's been in place. And we talked about it with Chad White recently, and I think still some unhappiness that it's made email measurement more difficult. But perhaps we almost need to sort of flip that over and say, Apple's intent is very well intentioned. They are putting these sort of additional privacy measures in place to protect their customers, from the risk of their personal data being exposed and abused. And perhaps email marketers in particular, need to make their peace with that. And whatever the tactics are going to be that circumvents MPP, the move to more zero-party data and greater use of clicks as an alternative engagement metric, there's good reasons for doing that. If we accept that, Apple's original rationale behind MPP was well-intentioned. I think there's a couple of others. You talk about DMARC, which is the authentication technology that underlies BIMI. And lots of people know that, you should have DMARC in place. But the vast majority of the DMARC records I see still have their policy set to none, which basically means, they got it in place, but it's not doing anything, which doesn't really help you protect your customers. And I'd like to see a sort of far greater movement towards, a policy of quarantine or reject, so that, when the mailbox providers act on your DMARC record, when they do see, potentially fraudulent activity, it never sees the light of day. I think marketers can definitely be more proactive there.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, because if you're a scammer, you can mimic a legitimate Friendly From name. You can plug in legitimate looking logos, right? But it would take much more than that to be able to take over a domain or IP. And so really, as marketers, the one way that you can try to defend yourself and your customers, people who are going to make purchases from you, is through, exactly like you said, Guy, that authentication.
Agreed. So, you know what? We're going to have to start wrapping up, Danielle, although I feel like we could talk about this for hours more. But
no, I'm so sad.
What's your best guess about the future of scam emails? Do you think we're actually going to get better at recognizing them, or are they going to get better at tricking us?
I think technology is moving so quickly and infiltrating mail, like email, so fast that it is going to be hard for us to keep up with all of the new ways and ingenious ways that scammers are going to try to gain access to our information. I think it'll have to be like an Avengers moment where all of the good guys team up. And that means mailbox providers, brands who are educating subscribers, companies that are building AI technology will have to, and I guess governments, but I don't know how quickly those wheels how quickly
Slowly,
those wheels
sure.
are going to move, to figure out some legislation that might actually be able to bring the hammer down and evolve from a technological perspective to combat this kind of stuff. Maybe I'm being a little bit pessimistic. What do you think, Guy?
Oh, I thought you were being very nice.
Oh,
I think my response to that question would be a little bit more blunt. I mean, the way I see it, as long as people are naturally greedy or stupid or naive or probably all three, there's always going to be scams, right? As long as there's a sucker out there, there's going to be somebody to take advantage of the sucker. And I think it's just going to be the ebb and flow that we've probably seen all of our lifetimes. The scammers are going to get clever, and then the good guys respond, and then the scammers find a new trick. And to misquote Shakespeare, "'Twas ever thus."
Well, I mean, lest we forget, scams existed before email existed, right? So it's just one other way, one other channel.
Scams, the second oldest profession in the world.
If anyone listening would like to learn more about the impact of scam emails and how to work around them, our blog is full of content with stuff on how to recognize these messages, how to be a legitimate sender. So there are lots of spam specific entries in there. Please go visit it, as well as, a whole host of other tips and tricks for improving your email strategy.
And speaking of those tips and tricks, Danielle, if you boiled it down to your one personal favorite, if you're giving, sort of friend or family a bit of advice in terms of what to look out for, what would it be?
I feel like this is one of those moments where I do try to explain what I do to my family, and they never get it.
Generally, my one's eyes glaze over at this point. But anyway.
Yeah, I would say don't respond to anything that you don't expect to receive.
Yeah,
and often personal, this is one of those things where even, lots of marketers are like, how do I get to the primary folder versus landing in promotional or social or anything like that? And it's really about the way that in part, it's about the way that the email is composed, right? Google knows that you're not getting a personal email with 50 links and a big HTML backed email. So if you get a personal looking email that you don't expect, maybe don't respond to that. And for marketers, authenticate. How about you, Guy?
Absolutely. I mean, I would basically take what you just said and flip it over. If you're a marketer, don't do anything unexpected because it's always going to create nervousness. But I think, one additional world, especially if you work with any kind of partners or affiliates, keep a close eye on how they're mailing as well, because it's not just what you do yourself. It's what others do around you that might reflect on you. That creates that nervousness too.
So much fun. Our first, or I guess our second, apart from the intro, Guy and Danielle solo episode, scams, will come with another crazy topic for you guys next time.
We're going to have to. It's been such fun. Right, so we need to sign off just very quickly. We will be back again in another 2 weeks. We're going to be speaking to Corey and Courtney, our friends at Antiriad, about their expert handling of consumer privacy laws and how to make a virtue out of doing the right thing with your customer data. Join us again then. It's going to be awesome. Be sure to tune in next time and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget to visit senderscore.com for loads more great resources to help you become a stronger sender.
To all you sleepless senders out there, thank you for joining us after hours, and see you next time.